you can count when you're happy. 1, 2, 3, 4, you can count when you're sad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or count when you're frightened. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, count when you're mad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Counting is wonderful. Counting is marvelous. Counting's terrific and how.
Hey look, we finally got another Kryptofreak. The name of my show is relevant again. Oh no, hold on, that's premature. This guy claims he's an alien. Let's get through the episode and make sure he really is a Kryptofreak before we run away with ourselves and start counting things all willy-nilly. It is, after all, called Visitor. Surely Smallville wouldn't have a misleading title like that where the kid's not actually visiting from anywhere, right? The episode opens with an antisocial and ostracized high school student named Cyrus getting bullied at the high school electronics lab, a guy who might have wound up an outcast based on that name alone. Might as well named him Weird McWeirdo Face. To be fair, he is really rude getting all up in people's projects to plug his odd equipment in. It is an electronics lab, there are probably outlets everywhere, but the story's gotta start somewhere, so generic, self-proclaimed king of all bullies, Kyle, and his posse get attacked with this week's brand new one-of-a-kind crypto power, heat vision. Something is off with the formula here. This creepy kid who keeps to himself seems to have one of the same powers Clark has, and nobody's dead before the teaser. What madness is this? I come for this show to see superpowered children murder each other. We've been dealing with all this alien cave mythology for so long I almost forgot what hackneyed show I was watching. And now the freaks are just scaring off the Whitney Foreman wannabes rather than charbroiling them. Smallville, you're just not the same anymore. I don't care how much mood lighting and dry ice and X-Files music you throw at me. You've changed. Cyrus is listening to what Kyle describes as a dial tone through his headphones, and it turns out he's listening for alien transmissions from outer space, believing himself to be an extraterrestrial. Naturally, Clark takes an interest in him, initially filled with healthy skepticism. This kid gets Chloe's endorsement before he gets one from the one actual alien in town, but as the evidence mounts, Clark starts to buy his story, even after it turns out he doesn't have heat vision at all, and that was just a prank he played on the bullies. Wow, that's thinking ahead. Cyrus puts a magnesium strip behind the wall and remotely sets off the fire, even though he has no idea whether today's the day he's going to feel the need to intimidate these punks. It's almost as if that's just there to tease us with a character who might have Clark's powers, the very next episode after Clark learns he's from Krypton. So Cyrus gets expelled, which is fine by him, as it gives him more time to work on his ET phone home project. Clark convinces Cyrus that he's open-minded about Cyrus's claim that he's an alien, and that he's not out to exploit him, which opens an exposition window so we can learn some things about Cyrus, although he's certainly not entirely reliable. Cyrus claims he came to Earth in a spaceship that crashed with a meteor shower, and an elderly couple raised him. They died, we're not told how, I guess emphasis on the elderly part, and he's passed from foster home to foster home until he winds up in an institution for freaking out about how he's an alien. Somehow he makes his way back to Smallville. He's still with foster parents, so I wouldn't think he'd have a say in that matter, as he believes he needs to send a signal back to his homeworld from the spot he was sent to in the first place. And also, for reasons he doesn't explain, he thinks the conditions to send his signal are only right every 200 years, so he has to finish his elaborate Emmett Brown Tower before the next evening. Kinda convenient timing he got Clark's attention when he did. You ever notice how the planets never align at 3 in the afternoon? Well, he sounds batty, but he has some compelling evidence, including a drawing he made of a ship that looks exactly like Clark's. I mean, if he was in the ship, I don't know how we're expected to think he knows what it looks like from the outside when he doesn't have it. And of course, he should have drawn a spacefaring sub-sandwich, since that's what it looked like when Clark crashed in it. And the spatial coordinates of the planet Cyrus claims he's from are the same ones Virgil Swan showed Clark. The mystery deepens when Lana's horse, who Clark suavely has just offered to stable on the farm, conveniently gets deathly ill so Cyrus can demonstrate his real power, instant healing. He can touch any living thing, produce a blinding bright light, and cure it of all that ails it. Wait, where have we seen this before? Oh, that's right, the spaceship that helped Martha get pregnant, which I'm just going to keep saying every chance I get because that never gets old. Oddly, Martha has a subplot this episode about precisely that, in which she goes to Dr. Bryce behind Jonathan's back, concerned about her pregnancy because of the spaceship's baffling involvement. Yeah, that's smart, Martha. Lie to your husband some more. It's that kind of deception that got kryptonite spores in your throat and made it necessary for the ship to heal you in the first place. So Jonathan doesn't think the kid's story adds up, what with his having a totally different ability than Clark's and not having strength or speed, and it turns out no heat vision either. And I like Clark's response. Maybe Kryptonians develop powers at different times based on the fact that he didn't get his all at once, and maybe they each have a totally different set of powers. Remember, he doesn't know where his powers come from at this point. But why isn't anyone talking about the fact that they do have a thing from Krypton that does exactly this? What if he was from another race that the Kryptonians barbarically slaughtered and harvested that ability from them for their spaceships? Or maybe he's just a delusional Kryptofreak who saw Clark's ship when it crashed, was disillusioned with people in general because of how poorly he was treated as a child, and co-opted Clark's alien heritage for his own in his mind. Yeah, that's probably more likely. Clark helps Cyrus break into the high school to get the transmitter Principal Reynolds confiscated when he got expelled. Reynolds, who keeps getting mentioned but will never show up again. I guess you have to be as stuffy and as lacking in personality as Quan to be a recurring principal in this show. But Kyle and his buddies are there waiting for him because Clark hasn't had any reason to do anything super this episode and nothing's exploded. They know Cyrus faked his fire powers, so they want to teach Cyrus a lesson for being a giant nerd and for humiliating them in that order. Clark uses his heat vision and sets one of their trucks on fire, pretending Cyrus did it so they'll think he really does have powers and leave him alone. Yeah, that's not conspicuous. Clark, you couldn't have set a tree on fire or something? And man, Clark really likes screwing with people's trucks, almost as much as the show likes crashing them. Cyrus makes the leap that Clark must also be an alien, even though he doesn't have the same powers Cyrus does, and Smallville is crawling with superpowered teenagers. I guess he's been so caught up in his own terrestrial evacuation plan, he hasn't noticed. The next day, Clark and Pete look into Cyrus's spatial coordinates and discover that they're the same place Swan claimed Krypton was. That night, Cyrus goes to every 90s Nickelodeon kid's wet dream, and who should be there to greet him but Kyle and his cronies, who decide to take their lives in their own hands against a guy they have good reason to believe can shoot fire from his eyes, and they apparently have no regard for life whatsoever as they try to pull the 20-foot-tall tower down with some chain and one of the trucks Clark didn't blow up, like Stanley trying to pull Thor's hammer out of the ground. As the tower sends a futuristic laser beam into the sky, which hilariously still doesn't deter our steadfast antagonists in their quest to murder a mentally unbalanced Radio Shack frequenter, Clark predictably shows up just in the nick of time to stop them. Good thing Chloe went to his house at exactly the right moment to tell Clark Cyrus had gone missing and to fill in the missing bits of his origin. She reveals that Cyrus's parents were killed in a meteor shower, much the same way Lana's were. Good thing we rarely show these things in flashbacks in this show. I don't think I could take Cyrus's tragic psychosis nearly as seriously after laughing uncontrollably at their demise. And okay, so that clenches it. We've got us a bona fide Kryptofreak, y'all. Funny how Chloe's research voodoo always kicks in during the last 5 minutes of the episode. Star Trek's Deus Ex Machina is often technobabble. Smallville's is Chloe's research. Kyle's neck gets broken, and Cyrus, even though he thinks his native people have come for him, decides to sacrifice his chance to leave Earth to help his enemy. Clark has shown him a ray of hope because of his good nature and how much he, another alien, cares so much for humanity. Cyrus uses his insta-hospital powers and cures Kyle, then falls over in a bizarre, catatonic state. Clark finds out later that he had a total mental breakdown after he realized the light he saw wasn't from a spaceship, but a Kansas State Police helicopter, and couldn't handle the fact that he wasn't an alien after all. Clark needs to start telling every friend he makes that he initially thinks is entwined with his destiny to take the first train to Bloodhaven and never look back. First Kyla dies, now this guy recedes into himself, never to recover. If Clark Kent takes an interest in you, expect to be a dead person by the end of the week. Meanwhile, Helen is reluctant to move in with Lex because the tabloids are having a field day with their relationship, calling her a gold digger. She doesn't even have any patients at the hospital because of him, but Lex sweet talks her into going through with it after agreeing not to rush her. Appreciating his willingness to compromise, she rushes herself, and is totally moved in next time we see her in the mansion. She has a skeleton key that's supposed to open any room in the house, but there's one that remains locked. The room she's told by Lex's security is off limits to everyone but Lex. Gee, Lex, what did you think was going to happen? You hand someone a key and says it opens every room in a lavish Scottish castle, and you think they're not going to try every door? Must not have been the kind of kid who shook his presents at Christmas. Naturally, she tells Lex she doesn't want to be in a relationship with, quote, locked doors between them, and stomps off in a Smallville relationship drama huff. By the end, Lex decides to show her that room, and it turns out to be his X-Files room, his own personal wall of weird, except unlike Chloe's board of disconnected incidents linked only by meteor rock, Lex looks like he's onto a conspiracy, linking his miraculous rescue in the pilot, the octagonal key, and the Kawatche Caves all back to Clark Kent. His obsession seems to intrigue Helen before it runs her off, and the scene ends with him commenting on how interesting a family the Kents are, a calculated risk in an attempt to recruit Helen as an ally in his quest, as she, now with a vial of Clark's blood, is very much wrapped up in all this. The episode ends with a standard Clark-Lana loft scene in which Lana expresses what her feelings might be if she found out someone close to her was an alien. She says she'd find it strange, but she'd keep an open mind, contrasted to Chloe's earlier, totally unfounded statement that compared to humans, aliens would be a step up. Really, Chloe? You don't even know where they would come from or why they would be here. Are these aliens a step up? Or these? How about these? Clark and Lana watch a conveniently passing shooting star together, which Lana jokingly suggests might be a spaceship, then credits. As obvious as it is to do an episode about Clark thinking he's found another Kryptonian right after he's finally learned some things about his otherworldly origins, it's a surprisingly solid follow-up to Rosetta. I like that Clark is reminded of his own humanity after discovering his birth father expected him to be a conqueror, and that it's through an outcast kid who thinks he's an alien, but really is alienated in a way Clark isn't, that he finds renewed appreciation in his family and his friends. Cyrus serves as another mirror for Clark, another kid he easily might have been if he wasn't fortunate enough to have the kind of upbringing the Kents had given him. Sure, there are some major conveniences in Cyrus's backstory that lead to his believing he's from another planet, and the magnesium strip thing is really contrived, but I'm also impressed that we've returned to the Kryptofreak story model right after a big mythology episode, and it's more than just a baddie with superpowers trying to kill people. We have already had a sympathetic, undiabolical Kryptofreak this season with Byron, the poetic werewolf. Wait a sec. How is that not spun off into a sappy WB or CW relationship drama? But that guy's tragedy was laid on really thick, and the 18th century Gothic trappings made it silly. This is the most believable and sad superpowered guest star since Ryan. He's a kid who's lost all hope in people and is searching for belonging somewhere else, and I really like that he finds his faith in people through Clark, who is, ironically, actually an alien. Clark does the classic Superman thing, in inspiring people by example. If it weren't for Clark's insistence on staying on Earth when he thought there might be something to Cyrus being an alien, he probably would have let Kyle die. And he had the power to do a lot of good for people, but was so cynical about humanity, he never used it to help people. It's interesting that the only being we see Cyrus heal before Kyle is an animal, who Cyrus seems to empathize with more than he does any person. I also like that he has a psychological complex that doesn't make him a maniac, and there's an inherent optimism to a guy who totally loses his mind because he's so caught up in his own little world that when that's shattered, he can't handle the truth. Yet he finds his empathy and saves the person who's been the worst to him before that happens. The thematic crux of this episode is the loneliness we suffer after personal loss and what we do to find belonging. Cyrus comforts himself by looking toward the future with his belief that he won't be alone forever, that his real family is out there waiting for him. Lana lives in the past, holding on to the last vestiges of the better life she knew before nearly everyone she loved and relied on left. But good riddance, Aunt Nell. Clark looks both to the past and the future. Rather than clinging to nostalgia, he looks for the truth about where he comes from. Kind of a blend of what Cyrus and Lana are doing, except Clark knows for sure he isn't delusional about where he comes from, and he knows that he can't go back there. So he has to figure out who he's going to be based on what he can learn about his origins and how he was raised. Of course, he tends to look more at destiny than trying to define himself, but he seems more in control this episode. And Lex deals with his loneliness by living in the present, trying to understand the impossible around him to see if he can control it. He's even cultivating a serious relationship and can't help but make that about Clark, because unlike the other characters I mentioned, he's less interested in belonging than he is in power. I like that he's got so many of the pieces to the puzzle here of the real alien in his midst, when he meets this kid who claims he's everything Clark won't admit to, and that Cyrus is one more link in that chain. He's not from space, but Lex has had the octagonal key that goes to the spaceship he drew, and his father once had access to that ship itself. And you know, nobody sucks this episode. Lana and Chloe are both completely reasonable and not whiny. Even when there's innuendo about Clark's secrets, neither of them rolls her eyes or gets jealous of someone else they think Clark likes better. Okay, Martha hasn't learned much about keeping stuff from her husband, and Helen has that melodramatic line about locked doors, but that's about it. I'm surprisingly sympathetic toward Lana with her reasons for clinging to her horse, and she's not overly dramatic about it getting sick. And I'm surprised not to be irritated by the talk about how Clark's friends would react if they knew he was an alien. Now that there's real talk about someone maybe really being an extraterrestrial, nobody should be super surprised when they finally do find out about Clark, but I like that his parents remain vindicated for insisting he keep the secret. And yet he's comforted in knowing that if it came out, his friends might still accept him, and he wouldn't be ostracized like Cyrus is. There's a difference between being from space and acting like you're from space. We've had moments where Clark decides he can't tell Lana because she wouldn't accept him for who he is, and we'll have more of those later. I hate that because I already have a hard time appreciating what he sees in her, and if I was interested in a girl who I thought was shallow enough she'd drop me because I'm from another planet, like Ben Grimm's wife in the 2005 Fantastic Four movie, I'd probably be offering my stables to some more thoughtful chick with a horse. In an episode where there's a little complexity to the Kryptofreak, and there isn't also a deranged, murderous Kryptofreak, it's unfortunate that the antagonists are as typically inhuman and one-dimensional as our average first-season teenager murderer. These are the kind of losers who usually get meteor powers. It goes from typical to absurd when Kyle decides to drop the tower with Cyrus on it. These guys are so little like real people, it's hard to believe they weren't cut and pasted from a lesser script. They just show up whenever the story needs something to get in the way of Cyrus's plans, and they do whatever it needs them to with no logical motivation. Okay, so they hate the nerd, and he humiliated them at the beginning. The reason they don't do anything to him through most of the episode is because they think he might be able to set stuff on fire with his mind. The reason they finally decide to do something to him later is because it's announced that the fire was a trick. Kyle even says he knows Cyrus can't have anything rigged up outside before his truck goes up in flames. So shouldn't these guys be doubly mortified after that truck explodes? They can't possibly explain how that happened, yet they risk getting set ablaze to knock his tower down just so the episode can contrive a situation to get Kyle injured so Cyrus can be a hero. There's no way they would go there. They'd be huddled up under their covers at home, holding their teddy bears tight, horrified that their lives have turned into the third act of Carrie. And as usual, a lot of this story hinges on convenience and contrivance. A couple I haven't mentioned. I don't know how Kyle knows where Cyrus is at any given moment. They just keep showing up to cause trouble with no explanation as to how they know where Kyle's gonna be. It's also real convenient that Cyrus just happens to show up on the farm to tell Clark off for telling Chloe about him. So he's there when the horse gets hurt and he can save it. Why did he wait all day before coming over? And questions to ask Jarrell when I get to heaven. I've just got one this time. What exactly is that crazy blue space beam Cyrus fires? I kind of expected the tower to either do nothing or to just send an invisible digital or radio signal. But nope, it shoots this intense, thick beam of energy out into the ether. Is he sending information? Is he telling the aliens anything? And if the thing actually works and it goes all the way to where Krypton was that fast, could the transmission have been intercepted by someone else? Did another alien race get Cyrus's signal? And now let's go on to the count. This is another one of those decent episodes with not that much to count. We have one Kryptofreak, it's Cyrus Krupp. His power is crypto ship healing, and his motivation is beam me up, there's no intelligent life down here. We've got one instance of someone walking away from someone else angry, that's Helen when she tells Lex there can't be any locked doors between them. And we have one instance of Clark and Lana in the loft. This is a story that surprisingly sounds lamer on paper than it is in execution, and that's a big compliment for this show. I'm giving Visitor a 3 out of 4. Was there anything I missed in any category? Leave me a personal message on Geekvolution, and I'll be sure to add it to the count. I'm Captain Logan, and consider this episode counted.